Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Movie Debates. In case this is your first time watching one of these, essentially this is a series on the channel where I have a friend on and we get into some kind of nerdy movie-related debate. And today I'm joined by my friend Brendon to discuss which character had the best character arc throughout the Infinity Saga. So I'll be arguing for Captain America and Brendon will be arguing for Loki. And just as like a disclaimer, we're just focusing on their character arcs throughout the Infinity Saga because it's the only saga that, has a beginning, middle, and end at this point. Obviously, we know Cap is coming back for Doomsday. We suspect that Loki probably will show up in Doomsday or Secret Wars. So, as far as the multiversal saga goes, there's further character developments and happenings that could take place. So the scope will just be, Iron Man 1 to Far From Home. So I guess to kick things off, would you mind, just to kind of provide a bit of like a structure to the debate, could you, briefly explain to the people watching how you interpret and kind of view Loki's character arc?
I sure can, Caleb. Choosing a villain, or may I say a fallen hero or anti-hero, if you will, I think is all the right ingredients for a better story, because you have this sense of this glorious purpose of, someone who they wanted to uphold this this destiny, right? And then to realize that he was adopted. I guess you can say that his Frost gene was muted, if you will. I think that the idea of like thinking you knew who you were and then coming to terms with it and saying, like, now who do I want to become, right? And then going on this path of thinking that this is the person I want to become and becoming a villain in essentially the majority of the Infinity Saga. He's an adversary towards the Avengers, towards his own brother, only for like the purposes which it would benefit himself, right? But then I feel like what happens in Thor Ragnarok, we see something happen to Loki. I think he might have had a moment, and I don't think it's ever explained, but he might have had a moment where it's like family to him is important. His brother is important to him, and Asgard, like the people are important to him. Unfortunately, this version of Loki, his glorious purpose is sacrifice for Asgardians and for people. And if you really look at it, it's actually quite sad if you think about it, because it's almost as if it's like, wow, he kind of summed up to nothing. But one can argue that his summation, right, led to the biggest, sacrifice of all, and that's his own life to care for other people, right? So I feel like in that essence, he is a really his character arc goes from someone didn't really know who he was, became a villain, was mischievous and like just trying to like figure out who he was and like doing his own thing and only served for himself and anything else benefit himself. But then he comes around and becomes this sort of, I guess, good character too late type situation. And I feel like, and I'm a sucker, and I said this to you like prior discussion before shooting this video, I'm a sucker for a good sort of fallen hero story. I feel like they weigh more because it's what could have been. And the Tom Hiddleston, phenomenal actor, he does such a good job, I feel like, as portraying that. And I think those are the reasons as to why I think Loki has a great character arc.
Before we kind of get into like comparing arc versus arc, I'll kind of briefly give sort of my summation of Captain America's character arc. Largely as a character, I would define his character arc as a cog in the machine. And what I mean by that is he starts the first Avenger as wanting to be a cog in the machine that is, America, right? He truly believes in the values of freedom and sort of the fundamental values that the country was founded on. So when he, in World War II, he sees men are laying down their lives for, the greater purpose. And he thinks he has no right to do any less than that, even though he doesn't have the physical abilities to like be able to act upon his kind of integrity, if you will. So then, he gets the super soldier serum because Dr. Abraham realizes that, he's pure of heart. Essentially, when he has everything in his life sort of ahead of him, he has found the love of his life. She's into him. He's this war hero. He can finally act on all of this sort of deep desire to serve his country, be that cog in the machine. But, you know, he makes that sacrifice play because he puts the machine above his own kind of needs and desires. But then, by the time we get to Winter Soldier, for the first time, because, you know, at the start of that film, he's just kind of gone back to being a good soldier, right? The time has changed, the technology has changed, but he hasn't, right? He's still serving, now instead of the country, S.H.I.E.L.D. But Winter Soldier forces him to kind of look at the machine in its entirety, right? And question who he's serving, right? He goes from a cog in the machine to having to question the machine itself. And he actually uproots the entire machine because, you know, he realizes S.H.I.E.L.D. has been infiltrated by Hydra. And we kind of see that deepen in Age of Ultron, where he and Tony completely disagree about AI and creating Ultron. And we start to build that, you know, he's starting to question his teammates as well. And then obviously in Civil War, that kind of reaches its climax where he sees the Sokovia Accords as yet another machine that is trying to kind of confine him and control him. And he understands that, you know, through serving S.H.I.E.L.D. when it was really Hydra, that, you know, you can't just mindlessly be a cog in the machine, right? Like, you can't mindlessly trust the machine. So ironically, Captain America becomes a fugitive in America because he refuses to just be a cog in the machine. And then by the time of Endgame, for the first time, he starts thinking about his desires. He kind of goes full circle from good soldier, cog in the machine, to starting to question the machine, to complete revolting against the machine, to finally putting his wants and desires above his duty to serve. And I think that ending of him retiring is just so satisfying because A, it's very poetic because at the end of First Avenger, I'm going to need a rain check on that dance. Finally gets the dance. But then also it's just such a good cap, no pun intended, to his character arc because he essentially retires. And in my opinion, every good soldier deserves a time to, you know, put the shield down and start to really live and put their needs and desires kind of above that of like the greater machine, if you will.
I agree with majority of the things we were saying with Captain America, Steve Rogers being that cog in the machine and stuff like that. So I think that, yes, like all those things are true, and having that, you know, full circle storytell like moment and putting his desires above his duties of his country and like wanting to do something for him for once, I feel is like tremendous feat in storytelling. However, there is something in a fallen hero story that has yet to be discussed. How it concluded with Cap, if you're just looking at the Infinity Saga, and the conclusion with Loki, the fact that Cap had a like present bow ending, and technically Loki did too, but one can argue not really, because he didn't really get his cake ending. Maybe he wasn't meant to be, but there's always a question of what if he did? And I feel like that stirs long-term conversation about a character arc and how his character was perceived over Cap's in that essence.
Okay, so essentially you're saying there's like an added additional element of like there's like a tragicness to Loki where
yeah.
More could have like been done, right?
Yes.
Okay. Where I would push back mainly with Loki is because when I really kind of went back and thought about his character arc, I don't think he changed nearly as much as I initially thought he did. And what I kind of mean by that is we see in Thor 1, what kind of is his big driver is his desire to have a throne, to be a king, to rule over people. Like he kind of has that desire to be in a position of power to like get recognition, right? But he kind of always feels like he's in like Thor's shadow to an extent. And then, you know, we kind of see that in Avengers 1 where he tries to take over the world. You know, he's after that fame, glory, kind of recognition that comes with like being in charge. And then even in Thor the Dark World, we kind of still see that because when, you know, he does the fake out sacrifice death in Thor the Dark World, at the very end, we see that he tricked his brother and he's really pretending to be their father, Odin. And, in that period of time between Thor 2 and 3, he gets to rule Asgard, kind of cosplaying as Odin. And, kind of finally gets that kind of taste of, like, being in charge and, like, on the throne. But then in Ragnarok, I think Ragnarok is where a lot of people would point to as, that's kind of somewhere in that movie is where, like, the switch kind of happened, where he, like, started becoming a little bit more heroic and less villainous. And after rewatching Ragnarok, I think like a year and a half ago or so, I started viewing it a little bit differently. In reality, he kind of is forced to choose between Thor and Hela. And Hela is trying to kill him, whereas Thor is not. So it almost kind of like becomes like, okay, is he actively deciding to become more heroic, or is he kind of just going with the side that isn't going to kill him? Right. And I think we kind of see that towards the end of the second act when Thor and Loki are like escaping that planet with Jeff Goldblum's character.
That was
because
get help. Do get help.
Yeah.
I am not doing get help.
Yeah, we get
help.
We get the great get help scene. But after that get help scene, Loki tries to backstab Thor and like electrocute him and leave him there. But Thor kind of one-ups him because he was expecting to get backstabbed, and he's like, it's just who you are. And he like electrocutes Loki and leaves him there. And I think that on top of Loki taking the Tesseract before they like destroyed Asgard, I think those two things in Ragnarok kind of still point to deep down he still does have that desire for a throne. And I don't think that necessarily makes his character arc bad. But then when I look at Infinity War and kind of, his actual death in that movie, it does make me kind of view it a little bit differently, because is it a sacrificial death? Or is it if I can kill Thanos right now, I can kind of take over his plan. I can get the gauntlet and finally get like the throne or kind of control that I've always wanted. And I do think there's an argument to be had that, maybe in the reality is actually somewhere between those two things, where like he actually has developed a love for Thor and kind of still has that desire. So I don't necessarily think it's black or white. It could be in the gray somewhere. But I do think to an extent, because of Loki's greed and kind of desire for power and him taking the Tesseract, that's really the entire reason that Thanos can even enact his plan. Because if he didn't do that, the Tesseract would have been destroyed on Asgard. He starts out as, I would say, chaotic evil, right? He's mischievous and definitely a villain. And then I think a lot of people would say by the end, he ends as like chaotic, like good. I think it's more chaotic neutral. So I think the kind of progression isn't actually, I guess, as extreme as I had initially thought.
That's an interesting point that you made. I didn't really think about it like that. I guess it's always up until interpretation. So you seem pretty unchanged mind worthy on that, but let me see if I can make you interpret it in a different way. So through all the facets of, what Loki we see through the movies, very mischievous, like almost like chaos neutral. Like I would agree with that. Serving for himself, right? Because he's trying to go on this journey of figuring out who he wants to be, right? Right. You always have the opportunistic side of like always, because he's chaos neutral, right? He's always going to have that in him. But I feel like overall, he really comes to terms of who he wants to be. And then you mentioned the stuff about the Tesseract, which I forgot that he did take it. Right. I don't think that was, well, one, I don't think the Tesseract can never like truly be demolished when, I don't think it can be destroyed. Like it took Thanos to destroy the stones with the stones. So I don't think he would have still found the Tesseract regardless. Well, I think substanding really quickly in Loki season 1 or 2, he sees that the Infinity Stones are used as paperweights. So it's like they truly are like these indestructible things, and I don't think that they can just be like, I don't think they can be, because they can be destroyed. Because if he had to destroy them using the stones, then you can't just destroy these from like an explosion of like a planet or something. I feel like they're more powerful than that. But
Well, I would push back against that a little bit because like Wanda is able to blow up the one in Vision's head.
So Wanda was made from, she has this infinity, she has one of the infinity stones as her power source.
Well, it gave her power.
Right.
So she doesn't actively like have it in her though. I think it's debatable if
Yeah.
the time stone would get because like the entire planet exploded. So like I think there's a chance it would. Maybe it wouldn't.
But anyway, but
Yeah.
the main point I wanted to say is that I don't think he grabbed the time stone because he's like saw the opportunistic, like, oh, if I grab this, I can still have my glorious purpose. I think he grabbed it for a purpose for protection. I think to keep it, safeguard it, because I think at that moment, it's like, yeah, like again, we'll never know. This is all like we're reading into it too much. We're theorizing. I think for me, it's like he already made his choice of who he wanted to be, and he kept it because he wanted to keep it. He probably understands the power that comes from it from Avengers 1, right? So he feels as though that if it's safe with us, then we can protect it as Guardians, right? Now, Thor didn't know about it because, again, you have that chaos neutral. I'm not saying he's perfect, far from perfect. This is the Infinity Saga. His time ends far before we see him like to become who he may be, right? So I think there's some still imperfections, but in that moment, just because I want to touch upon it, I think he took it because to safeguard it. I don't think that's like him being opportunistic. I think that was again, chaos kind of way, not consulting his brother about it because that's inherently who he is as a character. But I think that was a way for him to see, like, there's a play that I have here. Let me try to save us and like save the situation for what it is. Because I don't think he had any desire of trying to gain something from Thanos. I think he wanted him to be gone. He wanted to like kill him.
I think that's a fair interpretation of it. I would just more so say, looking at kind of his decisions throughout the Infinity Saga, it's almost always, with the kind of objective to gain something. And I kind of view him taking Thanos out because, he was one of his men kind of under him, at the time of Avengers 1. I think he's kind of viewing it potentially, at least, as if I take out the general, I can become the general. His final words in that moment are interesting and would potentially lean me towards the kind of perspective of there was maybe some desire to usurp Thanos because he tells him, you will never be a god. And in some ways...
and he also said to his brother, just really quick point, he said to his brother, when he was presumably giving the Tesseract to Thanos, he said, we will rise again. Because a lot of it was, and I interpret it as like, he's all about the possession, I this, I that. His actions are all about himself, I, first person. He used the plural we. So that's why I think that he also, his words, how he chose, were very wise because it's like he chose at the end who he wanted to be. But go ahead with your point. I know I cut you off there.
I guess I would counter that by saying like, we will rise again. Could just be like, we'll rise again with like him as king or like in the third. You know what I mean? Like I still think it could line up with a kind of my perspective of the scene, but I kind of have a saying that I apply to certain scenarios where oftentimes accusations are an admission at times. And I think him saying, you will never be a god, can be interpreted as almost his own insecurities of realizing in that moment he won't ever truly be a god.
And accepting it.
I don't know if he's accepting it because like he's being killed in that moment, you know what I mean? So it's almost like a way of him lashing out in that moment of like in the realization of the crushing realization and kind of tragic realization that he won't ever truly become a god and like kind of be on a throne and kind of have the power that in recognition he thinks that comes with being a god. And it's almost like he's like throwing it in Thanos's face because of his sort of like I don't know, I guess like inner turmoil and kind of realization that like he won't achieve that. So I would say that kind of brings me back to the potential thought of like he starts as chaotic evil and then by the end is chaotic neutral, which I don't think is as I guess interesting of a progression as like Captain America going from like the good soldier to someone who fundamentally has to question why he's serving in the entire system.
Yeah. I just wanted to, because I did want to, like, where you're like harping me on Loki. I'm like, I want to go back to Captain America because it's like I need something, you guys. Like, what the hell? But I did want to bring up one thing about the "you will never be a god" statement, because I do feel like that's a very interesting choice of words that at this point the Russo brothers directed or maybe written and to choose. And maybe they had ideas of like further Loki projects that obviously we're not going to discuss, and that actually has meaning. But in the timeline of the sort of the beginning to the end of the Infinity Saga, I think that those words, to me, what they meant was, you will never be a god. So at Thanos was like, yes, truly coming to terms with himself that he won't be a god, but he's made peace with it. And he's telling Thanos, saying, I'm not a god. You will never be a god. Like, in the sense of like, I can't be a god and I've tried. And what happens with people who are power hungry, they won't be what they want. You have to ultimately, like, there's another path. You know what I'm saying? So I read it as like he's accepted the person who he had newly become in that, like in Thor 3 and then at the final moments of Infinity War. And I think that's was a really interesting statement, because those were truly his final words. And I don't think it was meant in the way how you guys interpret it. But again, interpretation, writing, this is what it's all about. Now, you know, there's Captain America. It's, again, I'm going to disclaimer this. It's really difficult for me to, you know, go up against, I take a secondary character and go up against a primary character, because primary characters ultimately will have more screen time, more all this, more fleshed out, you know, all this stuff. I think overall he has more screen time than Loki in the whole Infinity Saga. But I will have to say, the only thing that's, you know, the two things for me that go against for Captain America is that, one, I think it's easier, not easier, but it's like Loki's character arc, even though his character arc was like, he had this big like uphill battle, and then all of a sudden it like finishes off with Cap. You sort of had this long uphill battle, and then it slowly declines in like a nice peaceful, like, you know, momentum, where it's like, it's Loki, it gets like kind of, it was like the top of the downhill, and it sort of just gets like cut off, you know. But I think with how they presented Loki to be such, it was such abrupt, but I think it was abrupt for a purpose, for resonance, right? I think that, like, emotionally, I feel like viewers, myself, you maybe even, if you know, agree to some aspects, can relate to like the character a little bit more, I feel like, in a sense, because it's like, you know, he had technically, in the third movie, he had this opportunity, right? And we were looking forward to see it, but then it was taken from us. So it's like, yes, his story was complete, but again, it goes back to I'm a big sucker for fallen like hero or anti-hero or type stories where it's like there's so much this potential, and then when it's cut off, it's not cut off because it was poor writing, I would say. It's cut off for a purpose. And I think the emotional gravitas, that's a word, right? That's a word, gravitas. The gravitas that they have, that the directors had for when they were casting, you know, Tom Hiddleston as Loki and stuff like that, it was more impactful, where you felt it, and then you just felt the pain, because then the camera sets on Loki and he's just there. It's just lifeless. And it's like, he's gone through so much in his life, knowing his backstory and all this other stuff, being, you know, adopted, an orphan, I think at one point, and then, you know, being mischievous and like going through all these ups and downs, like being a villain, and then finally choosing the good path, the righteous path, the morally right path, right? And it just sort of cuts off. It's like, it's not that it was in the incomplete writing. I feel like it was complete, but they wanted a certain reaction from the audience, and that's what they got. You know, very sad, like, what's the other word I'm looking for?
like tragic?
Like tragic. Thank you. And I think Captain America. I think Chris Evans, phenomenal actor, right? I think he's fantastic at what he does. Very much like no one else can play Captain America. Like he is the quintessential Cap. Like he's Cap. I might get flack for this. You might give me flack for this, or I might get an initial reaction from you when I say this. But it's his kind of story is kind of expected, in a sense. It's like I feel like when you have a hero, the boy in red, white, and blue, and it's sort of like a questioning of like, here's what I knew. This is like what I'm programmed to do. The cog in the machine. Question that. But then ultimately being like rejecting the norm and serving what I want to serve. I feel like, I'm not saying that has been done before. We sort of knew what we were getting ourselves into, right, with him, because it's like his story was playing out as it should have played out. Right, yeah, obviously there's twists and there's turns and like on the run, like there's certain things that spice up the development, if you will. But I think ultimately, that there was an expectation of like, we knew almost from the get-go he was going to have his happy ending in some way, shape, or form, because of the type of character he was and what he represents as an individual and what his personal values are, because he is a very much of a value type person.
Yeah, I think you bring up two interesting points. One about thinking Loki is a more relatable character than Cap. That's interesting. I wouldn't necessarily say I like strongly relate to either character, because obviously I'm not a super soldier and I'm not a god with like a mischievous powers. So
wait, Caleb, are you saying you don't have hard abs under that? That's crazy.
Not yet. They're still in storage.
Same. I mean, mine are in storage too. 5 years out.
But yeah, I would say I don't necessarily strongly relate to either, but I would lean towards Captain America being a little bit more relatable, just because, I think the sort of realizing that like the machine or like system or organization you like kind of work in is perhaps not actually doing what it should be, or reflecting the kind of values that the organization externally says they hold, but like internally it might be like a different story. I think it's kind of more common, or I guess like you more frequently encounter something like that versus with Loki, kind of, his sort of journey from like villain to anti-hero, if you will. I think that's kind of a little bit harder to kind of think of like a real world, like, oh, like I experienced this.
Oh, I have an example
in my personal life.
Don't worry.
But then also, I guess, to get into your point about like Captain America's story being expected, I would really disagree with that, especially with his second and third movie, right? I think Winter Soldier being an espionage-based movie is really not what you think of when you think of Captain America, right? You kind of think of, he's like the goody two-shoes, he's like the altruistic kind of Superman perspective of like peace and justice. And I think putting him in a movie that's about espionage and backstabbing and corruption, I actually think it really highlights and kind of forces him to grapple with those kind of lofty, altruistic ideals that he upholds in a very interesting way that I personally wouldn't have expected for a character like that. And then in Civil War, him becoming a fugitive ultimately by the end of that movie, and he kind of admits to himself that I should have told Tony about the Winter Soldier killing his parents, but even though I thought I was sparing him, really I was sparing myself. And I think that kind of growth and realization of, really that's the biggest mistake he made in the entire saga. And I think kind of coming to grips with that, but still being the bigger man at the end to say like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I take accountability. I'll be on the run. That's fine. But if you ever need me, here's a phone that you can reach me at. And I think, those two movies, especially with the espionage and corruption and all that, and Winter Soldier, and then in Civil War, the acceptance of, even though like he has legitimate arguments for being on the side of the Sokovia Accords that he is, him accepting fault and kind of realizing that, maybe I'm not this perfect altruistic figure and I'm capable of making mistakes. I think that part especially is quite relatable.
So I have to ask you, Caleb,
Okay.
really quickly. Side thing. Civil War, are you Team Cap or Team Iron Man?
Okay, so initially when it first came out, I was Team Iron Man. I am now more on Cap's side, primarily because I think I've come to the realization that a lot of Tony's guilt about, in regards to the Sokovia Accords, is because when you look at Age of Ultron, that's kind of all on Tony, because he made Ultron, right? So when he's looking at all this destruction, I think he internalizes his guilt onto the team, kind of. And I think that drives him to support the Accords to a fault.
You want to know who I side with?
Loki.
We need to be put in check. Whatever it takes. I'm game. Anyway, that was in terms of Loki, right? When I say that he's relatable or the audience can relate to him, I think in the context of okay, so I'm gonna get super narrative in a sense, very English really quickly, and I'm not good at it, but see if it makes sense. If you strip away the God aspect, you strip away the mischievous, not the mischievous, but you strip away the God aspect, and you strip away the context of just Asgard and all this other stuff, what are you left with? You're technically left with a person that doesn't know who he is. He's an orphan, doesn't have his real family, finds out who he is actually from, and then now contemplating on dealing with that, who he wants to be. And I feel in a bare bones type thing, he's a villain and stuff like that, but if you take all that away, he is a person that's trying to find his own place in the world and see where he fits, right? And I think that structure is super relatable when you strip away all the contents of what it makes it a Marvel, Disney movie, And I think with going back to the Cap thing again, I think both characters have great arcs. I'm not saying that it was expected in the sense of the movies. I think espionage was a great thing that they did. I didn't know that was the direction they were going to, but I think in the sense what I was talking about is the actual morality of his character never broke, right? I think that where I was trying to make my point is his morality, his character was always true American, no matter who came involved with that, even if it was going up against his own corporate entities or his supervisors or superiors. He's I know who I am and this is what I stand for. That never broke him. He never questioned his own, I feel morality, himself as a person. I think he always stayed true to it. Yes, he had the moment how you said oh, I probably should have told Tony, but it's not I don't think it was something that he ever lost sleep over. I would argue that maybe he felt bad and he's damn, I maybe should have told him, but I don't think unless we don't know this, unless I'm mistaken, I don't think it was ever there was never a scene in which that he was contemplating his own decision factor. We knew he hid it. We knew that subtextually, he did know, right? But I think his own moral character was never broken. And those are the 2 points I wanted to rebuttal against.
The reason I would put Captain America over Loki, primarily, I think it's a little bit more of a human and relatable story, at least from my perspective of the 2 character arcs. And also, and I haven't brought this up yet, but I think the 2 most important movies for Loki's character development are obviously Ragnarok, because that's where the potential switch happens, but also Thor: The Dark World, because it establishes his kind of backstory, him being a frost giant. And one of those movies is Poopity Scoop. One of those movies is arguably the worst in the MCU, which is not great for his character.
I mean, technically, that's a debate that we already previously had. We sort of had that discussion already.
So I do think that hurts because, I guess the worst movie that's integral to Captain America's character arc would probably be First Avenger, but even that, I think is a pretty good movie.
It's a decent movie, I would say.
yes, the death of Loki in Infinity War is tragic, but kind of, as we've both touched upon a little bit, I do think that cutoff kind of stops this version of Loki from truly progressing into the more heroic territory, where I think the kind of great overarching character arc that could have happened, it arguably does happen by the end of Loki season 2, is like chaotic evil to chaotic neutral, and then like eventually to like chaotic good, right? And I think we kind of get that by the end of Loki 2. But I guess like the framing of it, like of the Infinity Saga, I think then, we kind of get stuck in that gray area with Loki, where we're halfway-ish through the character arc, right? And we're not like really at that kind of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow yet. Whereas with Captain America, I think we get that full scope of every shade of the rainbow, if you will. I don't know why I got on a rainbow metaphor, but I did.
Yeah, so I guess for my closing statements, you did sneak in that one last little thing you wanted to mention about Dark World, and oh, you did do that, but I won't, because we're at the closing arguments. But I guess I'll mention it in my conversation. God damn you, Caleb. I would say that I think how I had said before, when you take away, like, if you keep like the characters, like, struggle, his morality, and like all of his backstory, if you keep all of that and you strip away the wow factor of Marvel and superhero and this the sci-fi fantasy type world, right? You get a character who I feel like a lot of us struggles with identity, who they are, and trying to figure out a place in the world that they're trying to be. And I think that is, anyone can really sort of relate to that. And I feel like that's one point. I also feel like it's I think for what the show, what the movies have done with Loki, I feel like it's I put Loki over Captain America, is because I do think like a fallen hero or anti-hero is more has more meaning behind to like what the character stands for and what they could have been, because it gives you that glimmer of hope. But then it's been taken away, but it's been ever so done thematically, in the sense where it's like, it wants to give you a sense of like incompleteness, but it is also complete at the same time, which I feel like resonates a lot with viewers, right? And yes, he's evil, he's chaos, but at the same time, it's like at the end, you're like, he's just really just trying to find his place in the world, and he thought he knew a path, but then he chooses a different, right? And I think that's more poetic, from realizing what you thought you knew and then being somebody completely different is more powerful, I feel like, than Cap. Like, you have Cap, brave man, like he has good morals and all that stuff, but his individuality of the person who he is kind of stays the same throughout. He questions other things, which makes him react to differently, but his main integral individual, what he stands for as an individual, is never broken by anything else. So those are the reasons for me as to why I would put Loki over Cap.
Yeah, so now that we've kind of ended the debate, I would be curious to hear your top 5. Like, who do you think the top 5 character arcs in the MCU are?
Top 5 character arcs in the MCU. Okay.
It doesn't necessarily have to be in any particular order.
Yeah.
It's like, which characters do you think are in that like kind of top 5?
Well, I guess for obviously the sake of this debate, right, I'm gonna put Loki on top.
Yeah.
Because I debated for Loki, so Loki will be number 1. But then after that, in no particular order, it's gonna be Iron Man, Captain America, Black Widow, and I also have to say, I don't want it to come down to the original Avengers, but I think Hawkeye. Like, it's going to come down to the like original Avengers. If not Hawkeye, if I would have to swap out Hawkeye, maybe I would do Thor in a sense, because he technically has, I'm trying to think of totality and completion. I was gonna say Peter Quill. And I think Peter Quill also has has a good arc in Infinity War, or I mean in the Infinity Saga. But there's a part of me where, because Gamora died, it's sort of incomplete, where he's searching for her. Whereas Thor is technically complete in a sense, but he's traveling with, he's traveling with them. So if you're just looking at the Infinity Saga, right, I feel like Thor's story is complete. Or you can even say someone like, in a way, Gamora.
Okay. Yeah.
I know I just listed off like 7 in total, but like, well, what would yours be?
No, I mean, I think all those characters are valid and should be in the kind of conversation of being top 5. Yeah, for me, it's definitely like Cap, Iron Man, for sure, got to be in the top 5. And then I would say Loki should be in the top 5. And then after Loki, I personally would put Thor there. I think Thor's character arc gets a little bit overlooked because, like, of the 3 sort of pillars who got trilogies in the Infinity Saga, I think his is, like, the most underreported because
of his movies.
Yeah, because Thor 2 is poopity scoop and Thor 1 is, like, okay. Low-key Black Panther, I think, could be argued.
Black Panther.
With, like, Civil War, his movie, and then Infinity War and Endgame, I think, is a pretty good character arc. But, well, if you guys made it this far, please let us know in the comments. Who do you think won the debate? Which side are you on? Which character do you think had a better character arc in the Infinity Saga, Loki or Captain America? Also, please let us know what your top 5 is. Who do you think the top 5 character arcs in the Infinity Saga belong to? Thank you for watching, and until next time, peace.
I definitely lost again.